On behalf of the Center for Intellectual Property Rights at Institute of Law, Nirma University, I welcome you all to the panel discussion on interface of blockchain technology and intellectual property rights, a very relevant and contemporary topic. We have with us the luminaries in this field who will provide us with insights into this pertinent issue. Today at the panel, we have with us Mr. Zamir Nathani, Senior Vice President and General Counsel at UFO Movies Limited. Zamir Sir is an LLB and LLM in several fields, including corporate, intellectual property, and international trade laws. He also pursued the program for leadership development at Harvard Business School. Sir was a law firm attorney at renowned global companies such as Johnson & Johnson, LG Electronics, and other such MNCs. He was also the Associate Vice President at Reliance Entertainment and the Head of Legal Department at the Balaji Telefilms and also at the Raymond Limited. Sir was also awarded the General Counsel of the Year Award by the Indian National Bar Association. We are delighted to have you here with us, sir. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Our next panelist is Mr. Abhishek Malhotra, Managing Partner at TMT Law Practice. Sir is a member of the state bars at California, USA, and Delhi. His primary areas of expertise include prosecution and defending the clients, and also other expertise areas such as intellectual property, commercial dispute resolution, and the subject areas of technology, media, and telecommunications. So also provides his inputs to the Government of India on issues related to copyright and data privacy. He also advises several think tanks that are associated to technology, media, and telecommunications. The session today will be moderated by Ms. Taruna Jakar, Associate Head, Center for IPR. Ma'am, I request you to kindly take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Amishi. I would once again welcome Mr. Zamir Nathani for accepting our invitation, that too on a busy day for him. So without any further delay, I would request Mr. Zamir to first introduce the topic itself as to what exactly is blockchain and how does it have an interface with intellectual property. Because as a layman, we do not understand these particular technological terms as to how and what exactly do we understand by the term blockchain. What do we understand by the term cryptocurrency, which we always see very much associated with blockchains, and so on. So with the introduction, then we'll be able to come up with the questions.
Okay. So just to begin with, when we were preparing some notes for this particular lecture, I was trying to recall that, when was this discussion come up last? And it was 2017 for a big university in Mumbai. And we had made exactly on the same lines on what is blockchain. All right. Now, just because it is a university environment, I want to start with one example so that it sets in your mind that, what could be the long-term effect of that. We all have heard that there was a fraud which has happened, Nirav Modi fraud, etc., which happened where money was transferred from the bank account because of the SWIFT account, which was authorized by a bank person, and therefore monies were getting transferred, which were more than the limit of that authorizing officer sitting in Mumbai branch of the bank. Okay. Now this SWIFT transaction was happening between two banks in two countries. If blockchain was in place, this fraud would have not happened because the blocks, each block will have their own due diligence and they would have caught that particular thing and the transaction would have not happened. All right. So just to give you a simple example is two transactions between a bank where a person uses the SWIFT account, like you have your bank account for foreign transfer, you require a SWIFT account, SWIFT. Now, when you transfer using that SWIFT account, that money goes into the foreign bank, Bank of America, or whichever bank it may be. And if blockchain is in place, the security mechanism will stop doing that. because once a person authorizes from here, it divides into blocks. So it goes to a particular transacting bank, then another block, etc. That's why the word blockchain. Okay, just to make it very simple for you to understand. Number one. Number two is that blockchain futuristically is looking much brighter in terms of various transactions. I'll also show you the transactions which are happening. I'm also an investor in companies like Google, Facebook, and all that. I'm a shareholder of those companies. So I've been seeing what developments are happening on that end. Now, in general terms, while this is growing up, by a definition, if you see, blockchain is a decentralized, distributed ledger technology that records digital assets. So SWIFT number has been entered, then it goes to the second block, then it goes to the third block. So these are digital assets, all right? Today, when you use your payment gateway system, for example, when you make payment on Google Pay, all right, or you use any other payment gateway to make payment of your electricity bill or anything else, then these are the digital assets. So one is your credit card details, all right? This is a digital asset. Second, it goes to that payment gateway and therefore you get an OTP. So your OTP also is a digital asset, and that's how the transaction happens. So blockchain will basically decentralize this. Instead of a centralized transaction, one SWIFT account, money has gone to Bank of America, it doesn't happen that way. It will decentralize, it will make it as a block, all right? So blockchain is a decentralized distributed ledger technology that records digital assets. It is a system of recording information which makes it difficult to hack and cheat the system. See, today, if you have got a credit card number and the PIN number of somebody, you can make that transaction. That person has 45 days to write down to the credit card company that this was a fraud. All right. The problem with the credit card company is that they get lakhs of complaints every day. How much you can handle, in what jurisdiction you can handle. If you are staying in an area which is a tourist area, like for example, some place in Rajasthan, Jaipur, etc., and even other tourist places, there is a systematic fraud which happens because of the tourists which are coming in. Now that tourist has come from Europe, that tourist has come from USA, and the credit card is stolen here in the system. I've literally gone with the Mumbai cyber crime police to catch culprits in a village which is 200 kilometers from the city, and we have caught the crime where e-commerce fraud was happening. So what blockchain will do is that it will make it difficult to hack or cheat the system, because now you have got blocks, which means that if somebody makes a transaction in India for an American transaction, the other block will be based in Netherlands, where a company will check. The third block will be based in US. The blocks will check that. And therefore, the transaction will not happen itself. This will all happen in milliseconds after some years, but you will not come to know. Like, for example, if somebody uses your credit card PIN today, and you also has the OTP, what is the internal check which the system does? Is the IP familiar from India, or is it coming from Africa or any other region? All right. So this is how the checks and balances will happen. In simpler terms, it is a technology where any digital information is distributed across the network, given the information is timestamped, transparent to everyone present in the network. Blockchain also has a prominent implication in various domains. Like, for example, we spoke about cryptocurrency, healthcare, real estate, voting system also can work on your blockchains, all right? Supply chains and logistics. So these are the areas which will get covered by blockchains. Given the accountability, security, transparency, and immutable nature of blockchain, it will have a significant impact in the field of intellectual property rights. All right. So as I go forward, this is a brief overview of what is blockchain. I will also tell you what are the legal issues which are coming up, because digital assets are in different countries. So who's the IP owner of that? All right. These are issues which are coming up. IP and blockchain have a dual relationship, whereby IP protects the blockchain on one hand, and the blockchain technology can be used to strengthen IP regime on the other hand. See, what you're doing by using the blockchain is that your credit card information is your private, personal, sensitive data under the law today. Now that is the IP which belongs to you. So IP will, one hand, protect that particular data in different countries. All right. So that is one of the benefits you will get of jurisdiction. Second is that data privacy law of those countries will be also applicable if the IP is lying there. So for example, if India is yet to come out with a data privacy law, if the transaction of Nirav Modi happens from India to USA and the server sits in Netherlands, then GDPR by default applies to that. So you are IP protected in that sense, also in a jurisdiction, because your IP is also protected as well as your privacy is protected. Okay. 5 potential use cases that blockchain based IP management presents are: one is your smart contracts, etc. These examples which I'll take it up. Now, France became the first country to regulate the recording and securities transactions on a blockchain. All right. So futuristically, when we are talking about cryptocurrency, even your share trading will happen on blockchain. All right. Because share trading transaction also today, sitting here in India, I can invest in Google, Facebook, etc. These are all transactions which will gradually have blockchain in place so that there is no fraud which is happening, and the system is more robust in terms of the banking and the transaction. Okay. In April 2016, French government ordered to legislate rules regarding mini bonds. The order for the first time defined blockchain as a shared electronic storage device or a shared electronic recording system allowing authentication. So your OTP and all in the chain is like a blockchain. So imagine your future where you will have inbuilt systems where your transaction is protected because there are blocks, and therefore illegal unauthorized transactions can't happen. All right. Arizona, which is based in United States, they actually amended their Electronic Transaction Act to include blockchain records, signature, and smart contracts, which may not be denied legal effects. Which means today, if I've sent you a smart contract, you have signed it on DocuSign, and the payment has been approved on particular system, that particular system will have in the blockchain a legal validity to it. All right. So this was about 2017 or something, and 2018, even Ohio in United States passed that particular law. In terms of India, there is a discussion paper by Niti Aayog. Everybody would have heard about it, or it's known as Blockchain Platform India Chain. All right. This particular discussion paper is basically to strategize the implementation of a decentralized data marketplace, which will be based on blockchain technology systems. All right. One example which I can give you is about Facebook. We had all heard about a controversy that, whatever data was provided to Facebook, they had shared with a company known as Cambridge Analytica in United Kingdom. That particular company was profiling everybody on the basis of what can be your prospective voter when you stand for an election. All right. That was one of the allegations also there. Now, when you have blockchain systems in place, these kinds of data flow will be blocked. So what's the future of the blockchain? It's a widespread distributed data models, which is called as blocks, digital ledger technology-based systems, potential ecosystem for specialized chains, and cryptocurrency, blockchain-based security, etc. These are the future we are looking at blockchain, and therefore it is very important, especially for banking sector. This is going to be a boom. All right. So this is with respect to the IP ownership of a particular block and the blockchain system in itself to give you a security environment is what is the blockchain interface, which you're going to see in the next 5 years. This is my overview on explaining the blockchain. Thank you.
We have Abhishek Malhotra sir also with us.
Hi, Abhishek.
So I'll just
Hi, Samir.
welcome you. Good morning, sir.
Hi, Tarun.
So just to give you an overview of what we were discussing. So Mr. Zamir was just explaining us in very, very simple terms as to what exactly do we understand by blockchain. and in what industries does the blockchain is very prominently going to be used and is being used also. So I would forward the same question to you as well, sir, that what do you think exactly is a cryptocurrency and how can it have an legal implication in today's India that we see, which is technologically advancing?
So I think I did log in when I was listening to Zamir explain in a fair amount of detail and a lot of particularity and clarity with regard to what exactly does constitute this animal called blockchain, and what its uses and potential advantages, etc., would be. Before I get into the specific of the query that you've put to me, Taruna, it's as perhaps today's topic is also a little around the interplay and the interface between intellectual property rights and blockchain. Let me just get into some of the fundamentals of that, and I would request the audience to bear with me or pardon me if I'm repeating any of the things that Zamir has already discussed. But at a very fundamental level, when you are talking about intellectual property rights, there are identifiable subsets to that process, which which I would like to identify, and then of course put it in context of the blockchain technology. When I'm the first aspect of intellectual property, and there are distinctions between the individual subsets of patents, trademarks, and copyright and design, but broadly speaking, intellectual property rights are granted to protect priority. In a case of a patent, it is in most jurisdictions the first to invent, in some jurisdictions first to file. So it is about priority. In the case of trademark, it is prior adoption. In the case of copyright, while of course it is understood that it is to do with authorship and originality, but when you're talking about originality, one of the aspects to be addressed is whether it is not copied from somewhere else and it is original to you. It is highly coincidental that two people, though possible of course, that two people sitting in different parts of the world or different parts of the same city or country are able to create a substantially similar set of creative works. But typically speaking, the presumption will be that if there is substantial similarity, then the later person would have had access to the earlier work. So, as I said, it is about the priority, who gets there first. So, in case of the creation of IP, it is extremely important to be able to ascertain through a verifiable process that I did it first or you did it first. So the creation of IP is extremely important, and the date stamping of that is extremely important. What we often used to advise clients in the digital pre-blockchain era, we all know that copyright is not mandatory to register copyright in India. As soon as you create something and you put it in a medium, a tangible medium from which it can be perceived. It could be a book where there is writing that could be perceived. It could be a recording where there is music that could be perceived, etc. So wherever it is put into a tangible medium from which it can be perceived, it is entitled to copyright protection. So especially in those countries, and there are a lot of them, where copyright registration is not mandatory, it becomes extremely important to assess as to who created it first, the date stamping, etc. So we used to advise our clients that if you're not interested in going ahead and applying for copyright registration, which is a voluntary process, the minimum that you should do is try and create some record of it, put that copyright, the written matter of the copyright application or whatever you've created in an envelope, address it to yourself and send it to yourself by speed post AD or registered AD. That's a clear indication that on that particular day, you perhaps have created this. But, there are ways and means of getting around it. What if you were to mark a blank, an empty envelope and send it back to yourself? So how blockchain helps in this regard is because it is a system where you can input stuff, but you can't alter it. There will be a date stamp of a creation of IP that can be easily publicly verifiable, encrypted, thankfully not capable of being interfered with. So that's a huge tool available both to IP owners as well as to people who wish to verify it, government entities, etc., to be able to ascertain as to when a particular intellectual property was created. Same in the case of patents. Very, very important, perhaps also from the point of view of trade secrets confidentiality. You can create an NDA, which would then be possible to not only assess as to when that confidential information was actually shared, who it was shared with, and very importantly, you can actually specify what part of the information that you're sharing is confidential or protected know-how. And I know it is very fundamental, it is very basic, but the impact of having a third-party verifiable public resource that is encrypted and incapable of being tampered with is tremendous for the IP industry. And it's only over a period of time that perhaps we will realize the importance once the evidentiary value of that starts becoming important, once we figure out that it is in a priority of use, who got there first, who created it, when, what time was it created, was there a possibility of being accessible? All of those questions will come up, but the creation of IP is a huge plus when it comes to the prioritization, preservation of that evidence from that perspective. The second aspect is, we all know that, and this is of course especially so in the case of patents. When I'm filing an application for registration of a patent in, let's say, India, as you all know, while I can exercise my rights of patent once granted only in the territory for which it is granted. However, if I have to demonstrate novelty of that patent, I must be able to overcome any other prior publication or availability of a similar invented article or process or product or whatever it is anywhere in the world. So my search that is being carried out by me or by the patent office, which is examining my application, will have to be a worldwide search. But of course, the impact and the enforcement of that right is territorial only. So in the process of carrying out a search, both when I am assessing whether my product or my invention is capable of being protected, or when I'm trying to figure out whether what I am doing is not infringing, from both those points of view, again, blockchain is extremely helpful to make an assessment as to what exactly is the scope of the prior art that is available in the public domain. Again, an extremely important tool, because very often, either people who are applying for patents are aware that their invention is already covered by something, but they deliberately go ahead and file anyway, which adds to the burden of the patent office and then slows down the overall process. Or possibly they're not aware at all as to whether this particular technology is already covered or not. In either event, because the ultimate aim of this technology of blockchain is to have access to such encrypted, publicly available documents at a fraction of the cost, it is going to be feasible and practicable and affordable for people to be able to assess as to whether or not something that they have created is capable of IP protection or not. So this is about synchronization of such databases all over the world, creation of the IP. Of course, as a consequence of that, there is also, we've heard about this aspect of the patent prosecution highways between countries. So there is a greater possibility of collaboration between countries when they are trying to assess as to what exactly is the level of protection that they need to impart. Also, so this is from creation and the prosecution of the registration process. Then we talk about once you've got your IP, you've been granted that, how do you monetize it? Because ultimately, what is the trade-off? The policy or the law is recognizing that the only way that people will come forward and contribute to the overall knowledge levels in society, in the country, in the world, is only in the event that you incentivize for them. If you give them the opportunity to earn money exclusively for a certain limited period of time. So that's the incentive that you give them. In return, what are they giving? They are contributing to the overall development of creativity, of inventive aspects, of design elements, of traditional knowledge, of which is protectable, of geographical indication, a whole host of intellectual property which is put out in the public domain once that time period expires. So in that time period that you have that exclusivity, you want to make the most of it. Of course, if you have deep pockets, you're a big entity, big corporation, you're able to showcase your product or your creative services, it's not going to be difficult for you to be able to monetize your invention or your intellectual property. But the ultimate objective, of course, is to have as many people contribute towards IP protection, IP, growth of intellectual property and growth of aspects in the public domain as possible. So how do you get an individual who is perhaps created something but does not have access to a proper distribution mechanism to be able to do this? A publicly available encrypted mechanism such as blockchain permits this person to be able to do it. Smart contracts. You are afraid of putting out your IP out there because you feel that people will be able to copy it. You are afraid that in the event that this is copied by someone from a system which is not protectable, how are you able to demonstrate that you actually had created it on X particular day, that you had the rights, you had made it available and someone copied it? Blockchain solves a lot, if not all, of these problems. So that's a huge plus that blockchain brings in to intellectual property management and protection. And of course, extremely important aspect of enforcement. It is also helpful in detecting counterfeit activity. It is helpful, of course, in ascertaining as to where exactly the infringement took place. It is helpful, therefore, in an overall scenario in the enforcement of intellectual property rights, without which, of course, the rights that are given to you are pretty much worthless if you can't enforce them. So this is the dependence or the advantages that an IP system receives from blockchain technology. But it's a two-way traffic. Blockchain technology also needs to be protected by IP, or aspects thereof that need to be protected by IP, and which is what intellectual property also offers as a protection. I was reading one statistic where it said that in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been 112 applications that have been published already in India alone in relation to different aspects of blockchain. So therefore, it certainly demonstrates a substantial move towards adoption of such technologies, and of course, the protection that is afforded in a two-way street that I just mentioned, and the interdependence of intellectual property rights and the technology itself. Specifically on cryptocurrency, of course, it is a methodology. At the end of the day, okay, let me just sort of step back a bit. Again, the fundamentals that I described in the case of intellectual property and what are the kind of protections, how it is and works in the brick and mortar world, and how blockchain sort of helps in taking that same thought forward. When we are carrying out a transaction using money, using, let's say banking channels, why do we at all go to a bank? Why is it that central banks regulate the flow of money between one bank and the other, between one vendor and the other, between banks and vendors, between customers and vendors, etc., etc.? It's a whole complex web of transactions, and that's only at a minute, to a certain extent, country level. And then, of course, it spawns across the entire world now, globalized economy today. But at the end of the day, for people who are active in the banking industry and know the intricacies, if I have transferred money to you, your bank account, it's only a ledger that shows a debit entry and another ledger that shows a credit entry. So at the end of the day, it is individual ledgers being maintained either in physical form or in electronic form, or both, at different levels. Envisage what we've just heard with regard to how blockchain technology works, and Samir explained it extremely well. At the end of the day, these are individual blocks. The ledgers that are created in each separate bank, in each separate company, in each separate country, so as to speak, will be individual blocks. They are on by virtue of the cooperation that we have set up in terms of the international financial or domestic financial framework. There is cooperation amongst them, and there is that chain that is established. But those are individual chains, transaction to transaction. The blockchain, in terms of how it is established, has a timestamp of the movement of one entry to the other. So as I said, coming back again to the fundamentals, you can input something there, you can't tamper with it. So at the essence of cryptocurrency is the underlying blockchain technology. How you use it, whether it is acceptable tender, whether it is going to be used as a medium of exchange, is something completely different. The reason why cryptocurrency and aspects thereof, Bitcoin, etc., are so volatile is because at this juncture the acceptability is not clear from a regulatory standpoint. And El Salvador has adopted it as a means of acceptable legal tender and currency, whereas most countries have not. Recently, China seems to have banned every types of such currency. So the volatility is what impacts the underlying value of that particular cryptocurrency. But it is a great system of being able to manage and handle transactions. It's just that regulators have to accept that it is perhaps something which is already there and it could be utilized to their advantage in future, and how best to regulate it just so that there are no fraudulent transactions, that there is traceability and all those other issues associated with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for explaining the very minute intricacies, or basically the interface between blockchain and intellectual property and how they are working in a circular motion. Like blockchain needs to protect intellectual property protections. And again, even blockchains require intellectual property protection to protect itself. So this is a very, very unique concept that we have actually learned from you today. I have a question for Mr. Zamir Nathani. And it's a very broad question, but of course, it will have also very minute details included into it. So the question is as to what are the legal implications of blockchain on IP law, and what are the legal issues which are at stake when we talk about this particular interface?
So, in terms of the legal implications on IP, because this is a new domain. So blockchain is basically, now we have understood, is block. It's a decentralized ledger technology, which would solve your problem. And, a problem of unifying the patent system across the countries also, which are looking at it. This will also improve in a way your IP management, your effectiveness of the IP management together with the speed of your innovation process. Now, many legislations and patent offices are moving slow towards accepting blockchain as an admissible evidence, but there is a movement which is happening towards that. The genuineness of an IP rights and their holders will also help the enforcement agencies such as police, customs, excise, judiciary to settle IP disputes expeditiously if the IP data is made available on blockchain itself. Though some jurisdictional courts have taken cognizance of blockchain as an admissible evidence, it will take little more time because since the technology is settling down. But there are examples which are available. For example, in 2018, there was a court in China which recognized blockchain-based evidence for the first time. And immediately after this decision in 2019, the Apex Court of China affirmed that use of evidences stored and verified on blockchain platforms are admissible evidence. All right. So this was one of the cases which had come up. Now, apart from the IP, which is settling down right now, what are the other issues which are coming up in blockchain? One is your jurisdiction. Now, blockchain has an ability to cross jurisdictional boundaries. All right, one block is available in India, one is in Netherlands, one is in United States, one is in United Kingdom, London, etc. So that's the chain. Okay. Now, for example, if you find an OTT platform, now many movies which you're seeing in India and which is provided by an international OTT platform, the content is sitting on a server which has a web service facility for that company in Netherlands. All right. So they are the jurisdiction point of view. Now, this is the first problem because every jurisdiction will have its own laws, all regulations, all IP laws, etc., and even the privacy laws which are getting attracted. So one is the jurisdiction issue which is coming up. Number two, service level problems. The India person will say, I have done my part of it. Netherlands will say, I have done my part of it. US will say, I have done my part of it. So who's responsible for non-performance? Okay. Third is the liability aspect. If something goes wrong or if there is a malfunction in the blockchain system, who is liable? Is India liable? The Indian vendor liable? Is the Netherlands vendor liable? Or is the US vendor liable? Because everybody is operating their part of the blockchain. Okay. Third is the intellectual property rights, which we spoke about. Now, given the amount of investment and the potential financial returns which blockchain technology would provide, blockchain vendors will have to determine their IP strategy also because financial organizations, big financial organizations in the world are working towards a viable blockchain proof of concept model, and they're developing that in-house. Because for a company like Citibank, for example, this has a lot of implications because crores of rupees, millions and billions of transactions are happening across global in all the branches based in India, Japan, United Kingdom, US, etc. Data privacy, once your data is stored, it can't be altered. Now, that's one of the implications. Now, if you want to change a particular set of data in any other country, then there are there's a problem because everything has to be aligned in a proper way. Today, if you change your data in India, but that doesn't reflect in your data in other countries, that transaction will not happen. All right. And plus, changing of the data and data privacy itself. Decentralized autonomous organizations. All right. This so courts and regulators are unlikely to allow wholesale adoption of this technology, which will bypass their oversight. Now, today, when you're going to any court of law, for example, any high courts in India or a Supreme Court of India, and if you say that this is a blockchain technology where I transferred money from India, but there is a problem because the fraud has happened, the court will be only able to catch India vendor because other vendors are outside the jurisdiction of the law. All right. Smart contracts enforceability is an issue. You sign a contract with somebody on the basis of blockchain. Now, when you go for enforcement, the person, if there are 4 countries or 5 countries which are involved, which is using blockchain technology, which country will get jurisdiction to adjudicate this? All right. Today, you have a contract between India and United States. You know that, you have agreed for a jurisdiction either in the contract or where the cause of action has arisen. So it can be, if the cause has happened in India, then India. If the cause has happened in US, then US. But with the blockchain technology and multi-countries getting involved, the cause of action, which has happened for a specific event, whether it has happened in US, India, Netherlands, United Kingdom, in the blockchain system, that enforcement will also come into questions. The 5th issue which we are looking at is about the financial services regulation. See, when you're dealing in a banking system, you are governed by the Reserve Bank of India law in India. So there are similar financial laws which are also applicable in other countries. Now, compliance with those financial regulations is important. Today, India may not have a data privacy law, but the moment you store any European customer's data, that particular GDPR application applies to you, which means you are supposed to be GDPR compliant. So those financial regulations, when you create a blockchain, the compliance of that country wise is one of the issue area which has been looked into. But gradually, if you see, there are countries which are recognizing, I gave you one of the example of a China court which recognizes blockchain as an evidence. There's a state in United States, Vermont, in United States, which passed a legislation declaring that blockchain receipts accompanied by a written declaration of a person attesting to the details of the transaction is an admissible evidence, which means any receipt which is created by virtue of the blockchain receipts is presumed to be authenticated under the rules of evidence. So world is moving towards recognizing this under the law as well as before the courts of law. IP jurisdiction wise will require registration, and people have to decide on the IP strategy where IP will lie in every jurisdiction point of view. It's a developing subject, very interesting, but from an IP and data protection point of view as well as data security point of view, blockchain will turn out to be a boon in future. So that's my part of the submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much for very precisely pointing out the issues that are therein. My next and the last question which I have to Mr. Abhishek is, and then I'll open the floor for the audience to ask their respective questions if they have any, because both of our resource persons have very holistically covered the issues and they have also explained the concept very well. So my question is that how does the Indian legal system extends its scope to cover blockchain technology under its ambit? And what are the challenges of blockchain implementation in India? What are the legal implications of having blockchain technology in India, and how will India combat this particular technological advancements, not only in terms of intellectual property law, but also the other issues that Mr. Zamir has already spoken about?
So if I can sort of kind of summarize and restrict this question so as to speak, and please let me know if I've covered what you want me to really answer in terms of the question that I'm formulating right now. You would want me to look at the permissibility of use of blockchain technology in India at this juncture, and also make an assessment as to whether there is any impediment in the utilization of this technology, And if so, what it is that is being done in order to be able to remove those impediments. Clearly, both Zamir and I have demonstrated that there are huge advantages if used in a particular manner and in a slightly regulated manner for using this particular technology. So you want to know what exactly is the legal climate around it in India and how it can be implemented better. Did I understand your question correctly? Okay. So the first aspect is, of course, and I'll begin with the IP bit again because of the fact that that's also topical. Clearly, in the event that any particular blockchain technology is able to satisfy the tenets of patent protection, which is the utility, novelty, and non-obviousness standards, then it is capable of being protected and applied for as a patent. So that merely because it is blockchain does not necessarily exclude it from the scope of protection under the patenting regime. To the extent that there are aspects of it that may not be protectable by patents, maybe the software or the code that is written around it could be copyrighted. So in and of itself, merely because it is blockchain does not mean that it fails to qualify the IP standards. Second, this is of course IP protection for blockchain. How is blockchain in and of itself useful or can be implemented in India in the legal sense? The primary application in this regard would be from the point of view of the Information Technology Act. Clearly, blockchain is an animal that is developed in the digital domain. It is something to do with preservation of data. It is something to do with inputting of data. It is something to do with protection of data. It is something to do with encryption of data. Because it is in the digital domain, therefore, geographical limits of where it is stored and how it is done so is not something which is capable of being controlled. But the IT Act, even though it is applicable within the territory of India, if there is an action that has an impact with regard to any legal rights or liabilities arising out of India, courts are certainly not hampered by passing orders that could, if not have extraterritorial application, at least ensure that the impact of such technology, impact of such preservation, to the extent that it applies within the territorial boundaries of India, can certainly be controlled or sanctioned or permitted. So the Information Technology Act essentially is the one that needs to be looked at. Why is from the IT Act's perspective, it is neutral to what type of technology is being used. And there are certain criteria that may need to be satisfied for the purposes of that being useful in a court of law to be able to either say that this particular evidence has been captured in terms of date stamping, in terms of when it was created, in terms of when it was inserted in that chain. And therefore, it needs to be recognized by the court. In and of itself, electronic evidence is already capable of being protected in terms of the IT Act. There is also an amendment to Section 65. There's a certificate that needs to be accompanied with that, etc. Once you comply with that 65B sort of certification process and the requirements for that, then it is capable of being used as electronic evidence. Digital signatures that have been permissible in India for transactions. It's not an electronic signature where you sign off an email by putting in your name and it has gone out from your email address. It's a digital signature. Digital signature, for it to be permissible and used as an evidence of you having consented to a contract or you having signed the document, For that, there are certain identified entities who have been granted the license by the government, that the digital signatures issued by such entities, subject to the verification of KYCs, etc., is going to be accepted in a court of law. For that, the relevant blockchain technology provider or the system that is created there needs to be adhering to the current system of information technology in India for it to be able to qualify as that. And there are at an administrative, at an enforcement, technological standards, that kind of level, as Zamir mentioned, that there is a strategy around blockchain that has been released by Niti Aayog, and it's a work in progress. So, short answer to your question, certainly the Indian law is not in and of itself averse to acceptance of blockchain technology in terms of either its protection or protection by it. So in either situations, it is something which is not prohibited by the law. It is something which may not be facilitated, so as to speak, by the law, because that's something which is still a work in progress. But it certainly can be used if the relevant state safeguards, standards, methodology of preservation, etc., can be demonstrated to be tamper-proof and without any shadow of doubt.
Thank you, sir, for the very well explained concept. There are two questions from one of our students, Shreyansh. So his first question is that how will UNCITRAL adopt blockchain, and can amendments to UNCITRAL be helpful to bring the contracting states together to recognize it, and a reference to the New York Convention?
So, because of the fact that it is recognized that it is something which is capable of being used in the international context and international commerce, as in the case of other trade-related developments, legal instruments, etc., that have been created over a period of time, that that obligation or that responsibility has been taken upon by UNCITRAL to be able to take this forward. And I think that like we adopted the model law from UNCITRAL on arbitration, like we have the international treaties, specific international bilateral investment agreements, which is also originated in certain senses from the work that UNCITRAL has done in this regard. Ultimately, that's what we will be looking at in order to assess, not necessarily adopt as is, but in order to assess as to how exactly it is that we need to implement such international instruments as and when they are created. But to my mind, till such time that there is an agreement at the international level with sufficient number of participants either signing to it or acceding to it, till such time that that happens, it's going to be very difficult to actually create some sort of an acceptable cross-border basis for adopting this particular technology. But we've seen, especially in the last 20 years, that law and policy takes a long time to catch up with technology and technology developments. So I think the ubiquitousness of the internet, the access to data and bandwidth, the ease with which such transactions are being carried out on blockchain is something which is nevertheless pushing the governments to act quicker than they otherwise do. So I think that's what's possibly going to be the future in this regard, whether it is in regard to the UNCITRAL or the New York Convention to take things forward.
Our next question is that can arbitration be the bridge to help jurisdictional issues, or the Hague Convention of 2005 be something which is helpful in bridging up this particular jurisdictional issues that we have when we talk about the dispute resolution, or the state or the country which will have the particular jurisdiction to carry on the implications which have been created by blockchain?
So I think at the end of the day, whether it is the Hague Convention of 2005 or it is international arbitration, the process of dispute resolution in and of itself is something which there is a fair amount of, I will not say that there is an agreement that things will be carried out in one particular manner or the other across jurisdiction, but there's acceptability of the process of the arbitration itself, which of course are certain safeguards that have been inserted. The question, I think more important question, is on enforcement. And on enforcement of such dispute resolution mechanisms, on the award that is granted, on the decree that is formulated. For that, you need to have international consensus with regard to enforcement of those awards. So whereas it's interesting that whereas arbitral awards are enforceable in India under the New York and the Geneva Conventions, however, we have a very limited scope of enforcement of court decrees from individual nations. So whereas Section 44A, if I'm not mistaken, of CPC permits us to treat decrees originating out of Commonwealth countries as akin to decrees of courts in India. But that's not true of decrees emanating from the US or certain other countries, which are not, there is no reciprocity in enforcement of judgments there. But interestingly, for arbitration, that has been there. So what I guess has driven that to make that distinction is that the pace with which commerce moves in the country, in the world, has required that governments start recognizing the importance of arbitration and the awards to be granted there, and the flow of commercial transactions with the kind of authenticity and the kind of speed and the kind of international recognition that they need to be given. And that's the reason why policy and the law, at least of our country, has agreed to have enforcement of such judgments in the country, subject to very, very limited safeguards of challenge. So I think at the end of the day, it's a classic case, if I can say so, of demand and supply. There is greater demand for continuation of unimpeded commerce, and supply has to match up sometime or the other. So that's how governments are reacting and allowing such more alternative dispute resolution mechanisms to prosper and to attain enforceability.
Thank you. The next question in line is that would blockchain technology be considered as an intermediary, and can it be protected under the doctrine of the safe harbor? Because as you pointed out, that blockchain technology would have certain interface or implications being covered under the IT Act also. So can the safe harbor clause be applicable on blockchain technologies as well, if we consider it to be an intermediary?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because at the end of the day, an intermediary is what? Intermediary is a pipe, for lack of a better word. Water or whatever flows through that pipe, the pipe is, completely agnostic to what goes through it. It can control or limit such a flow. It can create punctures at certain places so that that part which is offensive or against the law is removed. In the case of blockchain, as I said, it is supposed to be tamper-proof. It is supposed to be, there's no one person that is responsible for the movement and preservation of data at any given point in time. There are different ledgers, different blocks that are created at different parts of the world or a country, or as the case may be. And these are all linked by a peer-to-peer public network. I don't know how the intermediary concept will fit into this strictly, because for an intermediary, you need an identifiable person who has control to a certain extent of the pipe, not of the stuff flowing through it, but at least of the pipe. in this case, there's no central authority. As Zamir said time and again, it's decentralized. There's no central authority that can control X or Y or Z. There's no entity or person who can control or interfere with what goes on in the process of a blockchain. It is supposed to be encrypted, tamper-free. So I think we'll have to create maybe a similar concept, but not exactly the intermediary liability or the safe harbor as we understand it today to address the situation.
The last question for the day, sir, is again from one of our students, Devashish. So his question is that various governments are skeptical to adopt blockchain as it is being used for terror funding. So what policy suggestion would you give to make sure that this is curbed?
I think more than blockchain technology itself, what is being looked at with jaundiced eyes or with some sort of care is the cryptocurrency part of it. So cryptocurrency is just one aspect of blockchain. Blockchain technology in and of itself is not a problem. It is the financial aspect of it which is being looked at with some amount of restriction, which is why I said that cryptocurrency is something which, even though it is gaining a lot of prominence, more so in the last couple of years, the governments have to my mind, a dual sort of approach to it. On the one hand, no government wants to be in a position where it cannot control flow of transaction and currency. That's central to the financial stability of the country, maybe of the world. At the same time, if people and more people are adopting it and they are flying under the radar, not paying taxes on it, and opportunities nevertheless arising for taxation, for control of such, then why should governments keep quiet and wait in the side, in the wings? Just for it to proliferate to such a level where it then becomes uncontrollable. So I think the ideal scenario would be that governments will have to work towards standardization of how blockchain technology can be used in the financial sector in order to create an internationally acceptable cryptocurrency, which then becomes legal tender and which is then easy to trace. If blockchain technology allows governments to trace each transaction, then you can possibly control or at least have some amount of, I won't say control, but limit on how monies are flowing, where they are flowing into, and then be able to actually use that technology to see the chain which has followed from one person to the other or the country to the other, to be able to assess as to who created it, where is it originating from. If there's a lot that is being said these days about the intermediary guidelines and the aspect of significant social media intermediaries having to necessarily provide for tracing of the origin of a particular message or data. That's being done, or it is going to be possible only with technology. It's possibly going to be helpful from a blockchain perspective. So what they're trying to actually achieve, maybe blockchain is the answer. The question only is as to whether you are in a position to be able to control it, and that cannot be done just by one country. It has to have international cooperation at that level.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abhishek Malhotra, for sparing time from your busy schedule. Mr. Zamir Nathani had to leave at noon because he had an arbitration matter lined up. So, right. Yeah. So thank you so much, and we hope that the audience has taken a lot of key takeaways from both of your inputs that both of you have put into this particular topic. There are many such questions which are unanswered, many such questions which we have actually found an answer to. So the key takeaway for me for this session was that there are so many issues that we can actually work upon, we can look into. So there is a lot of brainstorming that has actually happened because of this session and because of your inputs that you have given to the topic. So I hope that we are able to host you in person very soon at the Institute. But I'm glad that we could host you online. That all thanks to the technology. Now I would like to invite our student secretary for the Center for Intellectual Property, Ahana, for proposing the vote of thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. I, Ahana Agrawal, on behalf of the Center for Intellectual Property Rights at the Institute of Law, Nirma University, would like to extend my sincere and heartiest gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Mr. Zameer Nathani and Mr. Abhishek Malhotra, for taking out the time from their busy schedules to address the webinar and provide their valuable insights on this prominent issue. This has surely been an enriching and informative session. I also extend my sincere gratitude to our Director and Dean, Professor Dr. Madhuri Parekh, for her constant support of the Center to organize such events to stimulate and promote knowledge. My earnest thanks to Assistant Professor and Associate Head, Ms. Savina Jakar, for moderating the session in a meticulous manner. I also thank Ms. Gunjan Arora, Center Head, for her guidance and support in organizing the panel discussion. This event would not have been conducted smoothly without the assistance and support of Mr. Gagandeep Singh Khanduja, the Assistant Registrar ILAU, Mr. Digant Rajhor, and the Center team. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for joining in, for their patience and for the patient listening and throughout the session. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you once again, Mr. Abhishek. And we look forward to more such intercourses with you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for logging in a little late, but it's been a great session. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Thank you.
All right.